And I remember just feeling so panicked, like this is going to happen again. Like my colleagues are going to be really unsupportive. I can't be human. I'm going to have to suppress. But it was the complete opposite experience. It was the complete opposite. They couldn't do enough to support me, even though I was so new in.
Welcome to Elevate, the gathering spot for first responders, their families, and the communities that support them. Welcome, everybody, back to the Elevate podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Goodknight, and I've got a great guest today who is a ex-police officer in the UK, if that's what I remember right. When you hear her accent, you'll definitely know that she's from across the pond, as she said it on our introductory call. Before we get to her, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If anything that she says or we talk about during this conversation today resonates with you, go ahead and or you feel it resonates with someone else, don't hesitate to share this podcast with someone that may need it. That's one thing that we do here with the Elevate podcast is we share our information so we can tear down the stigma of the mental health in the first responder space. So with that being said, let me go ahead and get to Abbie Westgate. Hi, Abbie. How are you?
Hi, Kyle. I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I couldn't be better, honestly. So sitting here in a conversation with you is exactly where I want to be today because we all know that stripping down that stigma and normalizing mental health for the first responder is really an important thing. So go ahead and tell us about yourself, your background, how your policing days, and then we'll get into the conversation from there.
Yeah, sure. So I joined the police 6 years ago, around 6.5 years ago now. It was 2018, and it was at that time my dream job. I was kind of working towards that for a long time. And the day came where I finally made it and I landed my dream job and I was joining the police. But just before I was about to start, my mum passed away. So it was almost like a bit of a double-edged sword at that point because I had this dream situation, my dream job, starting the police, but also became tainted with a lot of sadness. And when you join the police, you're going into, it's a big organization and it's a big responsibility and there's a lot of training and I didn't know anyone. So it was going in at like the hardest time of my life into this really big unknown environment without any support. And I think the culture that I experienced shocked me a little and led to me to suppress a lot of my grief and my feelings to be able to just survive, make it through, get through my training. And what I found was that the grief started to come out in other ways. But I was still very much mindset dominated, pushing forwards, very driven, still am. But at that time, I was just pushing through and I was doing well. I got promoted after 3 years, so I made it to sergeant and loved my job. It was all going great. But then just a few things starting to happen, to build up, and then it caused me to hit this period of burnout and my health really suffered. At that point, when my health suffered and I was in a poor physical state, that's when all the things that I'd been hiding from, running from, suppressing, that decided to come up as well. So then I had it all at once. It was a bit like a volcano, and life became a little bit of chaos. So I had to find a different approach to looking after myself, and I went on a completely different path and found different tools and approaches to health and well-being and looking after myself to the ones that I had known.
Right. Right. Well, and two, when we had our first conversation, I know we talked about, like, as a first responder, our identity, and as first responders, we start to identify as first responders and we wear it as a badge of honor. We get complimented in the public when people find out that what we do, thank you for your service, we really appreciate you. And then when we start to have that change of, for whatever reason, burnout, high stress, traumatic situation, layered on stress or over the years, a family stressor, because we got to remember that first responders are human. We are human, and that's another thing. That's why we're not immune to the subjects of all the things that can happen internally and to our brain and to our thoughts and to our psyche. So just real quick, everybody first responder listening out there, we are human, and let's all accept that, because if we can accept the fact that we're human, then we're one step closer to accepting the fact that we can normalize our mental health, and that's the goal here. But when it becomes our identity, can you speak a little bit about what your identity was as a police officer? And I do know that you transitioned away from being a police officer, and now you own your own business, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But when it became, where did you have that? Was there ever a push-pull situation where your identity as a police officer and what you did for your community was starting to overshadow, and be a problem with what the new direction you had? Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the identity thing has played a really big part in the journey and was probably why I took 6 years to leave. I think maybe around 3, 4 year mark was when I really thought about leaving, but you don't realize how deeply embedded your service and your job is within your identity. And I think it took for me to be really challenged at the point of wanting to share the tools and skills I'd learned to look after myself with, knowing that my colleagues would need them and benefit them, but the organisation being quite resistant to those. And that's when there was a real conflict within my identity at that point, because it was like, am I staying in this organisation in which actually well-being isn't being prioritized, even when those that are in the job are coming up to them and saying, this is my experience, this is what helped me, I've got the skills and the qualifications now to help other people in my position, and it's still a no. And that was at the point where I started to come to the crossroads moment and explore a different path and thinking, right, I have two choices now. Do I stay here, or do I follow my heart and become more authentic and take this voice on the outside with the mission to help first responders?
Right, right. That's awesome. So, yeah, thank you so much for explaining that and sharing that information with us. Um, something you said, you sprinkled in there, and I do know from our first meeting that you actually were on two different forces. And I want to switch gears a little bit here, and then we'll get back to the what you chose to move away from, first responder duties. So, but let's touch base on this real quick. When it comes to one, the way you explained it to me was one place that you worked was very unsupportive, and then that had to have some form of pressure on you that most likely got you to resign from there to start a new place that may have had better things in place. So speak a little bit on the two different versions of, because you've seen the yin and the yang, you've seen the good and the bad in one short period of time. And I feel lucky because I have support. I've used my support. My support showed up the same day I called for support. They showed up at my house. Boom, here we are. Let's help you. So talk about that first place. Of course, don't give names. You know, hopefully they're changing their ways. They have changed their ways. If not, maybe you can share this podcast with them and say, hey, change your ways, and this is why. So talk about those two different, polar opposite places that supported you, and well, maybe first start the one that did not support you, and what that did to you, and being a public servant slash first responder.
So I feel really grateful that I was able to have the two experiences. It was very two contrasting experiences, just so that I know the first one I experienced wasn't the way that all police forces are. But I remember very early on in my service in my first police force, and the culture was very much kind of get on with things. And if you can't, then maybe you're not up for the job. So there was always that, right, so I have to suppress things but can't show emotion or kind of be human because I'm going to be either seen as not competent at my job, will I lose my job? And we're working in a hierarchy, so actually we need these other officers who've got more experience. They also have an input on your development, especially when you're a new student officer. And
Mm.
some of those student officers are responsible for signing you off on certain things. So if they're saying, well, you need to just kind of push that to the side and get on with things, and they're also responsible for your development and your path and your progress, I suppose that was when the suppression came within me, because I didn't have the tools and skills to be able to navigate a situation like that. And it was my dream job and I wanted to do well. And I found that that approach it almost put me in a survival mode within the culture. It was almost always like in a stressed state, um, and always kind of worrying about what people were saying and do. And it was very quite a harsh, unforgiving environment where there would, your colleagues weren't very supportive essentially, and that was a really, really hard place to work. And I was there for 5 years, and
Mm.
I really didn't realize the impact that that was having on my health and well-being until I moved over. But what also I experienced was when I reached that point when I was having, the burnout and everything was happening at once and life was a little bit chaos. That same approach was there. There was no support, was almost, even though I'd had a really good reputation and worked really hard and had, been promoted and had, done exceptionally well, it was in that moment where there was just, there was no compassion. There's like a fundamental lack of compassion. And
Right.
I think for me, that really opened my eyes to, do I really want to stay somewhere like this where actually I don't feel like fundamental safety? So not the safety that we would know as first responders as like, are we in immediate danger? It's that safety in the nervous system where you can be yourself and know that you're supported by those around you, so that you can be open and vulnerable, that's what we need to do. Isn't, like you say, we're human, and that was completely absent from there. I ended up having a fresh start at a new police force and I transferred over. And I was really quite anxious about that because of my previous experiences.
Right.
And then, in a bit of a turn of events, I had a parallel situation happen. So I joined this new police force and then I lost my sister. So that was the start of this year. And I was very new into the force. And I remember just feeling so panicked, like this is going to happen again. Like my colleagues are going to be really unsupportive. I can't be human. I'm going to have to suppress. But it was the complete opposite experience. It was the complete opposite. They couldn't do enough to support me, even though I was so new in.
Hmm.
But also, they gave me permission to be human. And for me, I think just gave me a bit of breathing space. And I think because I had new skills and tools to help support myself, it meant that I was able to deal with things as they were arising, like in the moment, instead of suppressing things and having to deal with them down the line. So, in terms of long term health and well being, that experience was incredibly supportive. And it was the complete opposite to where I'd spent 5 years of my life in a contracted, stress state because I didn't feel safe in my environment by the way that my colleagues and the organization was kind of conducting itself.
Now, with that second job, with that second police force, did that affect the way that you policed? Like, can you recall a time from the first force that you did something in on your on duty, on the job, on the clock, where you made a choice or decision, and when you got done with that, you're like, man, what am I doing? And then transfer that to the new place, and how much more of that support actually gave you the ability to police better. Do you have an example of that? I mean, of course, no details, but
Yeah, I think it's nothing specific, but I realised that I was quite short-tempered and snappy and quite moody in the first police force. And now I realise because my stress levels was, so high, always kind of looking over my back and watching my back and trying to keep my ear to the ground. And, it's an extra additional stress that when you work in a job like the police force, like you don't need that. That can be really harmful. So it was like the energy and the stress and being quite snappy. And I found that when I moved over, like my stress levels and the way that I could support my colleagues and just stay in a calmer place and have a little bit more energy and just feeling safe in my environment and supported by my environment just meant that I was able to approach situations from a more regulated place more often.
right. Well, with that being said, too, I can't. I'm not from the police force. My background is EMS and healthcare and paramedic. So what stuck out when you explained that is that you know I have a thought here. I definitely want to make sure I get it out. I want to make sure I get it out the right way first, because when you're in an environment full of stress, that's when you kind of see those mistakes happen where it can now mean your career or your livelihood. Like we've seen police officers unfortunately make bad decisions probably because they're stressed and they make horrible decisions, and they're labeled bad cops. They're just not, I don't think they're bad cops. They're stress cops, and they didn't have
Yeah.
that safe space to understand what, how to approach a different situation possibly. So my question is can you speak on, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. Can you speak on, do you feel that that you were a less of a police officer? Because we all know that police officers are on guard all the time. They are trained to be very vigilant, to be very hyper focused, to not trust people. I mean, that's the truth. And they're trained to be very, very inquisitive at all times because of their safety, because of how fast a situation can turn on them, right? So when you had the support, did you feel like you were any less of a police officer than you were before, when you had to push and repress and be tough and just get over it and blah blah blah? So do you feel that the support that you got, did that soften your policing any? Like, were you, because my point
Hmm.
is I think there's a mantra out there, and there's a feeling out there that if we start to understand our feelings, that we're less of a man or a less of a woman or a less of a police officer or less of a firefighter or less of a paramedic. Like, we can't do our job properly unless we are on point the whole time. And when I get this stuff about my feelings and I'm dealing with it, that's going to make me less of a person or less of a police officer or public servant. Did you notice a difference between the two? Am I getting,
Yeah.
it's a very
Okay.
complicated thought process I have, and I'm trying to get it out in the moment without with it, with trying to describe it. I think you understand what I'm saying, so just go ahead and talk about that.
Okay. So what I notice is that in both police forces, I would say in the first police force, it was a similar approach in that I have always been able to adapt and try and communicate first, but I can take it up, and be quite assertive if I need to, and then bring it back down and had that control. But in between the two police forces and me learning a lot about the nervous system, what it helped me with was to become more emotionally intelligent and know where I was at in my nervous system. So when I say nervous system, I mean the two parts of the nervous system. One's activation, one's deactivation. So we need both. We need to be able to run into those high pressure situations and take action, but we also need to be able to bring it down a little bit and speak to people on levels that we can communicate with them and come from a calm place. And having that knowledge and actually a supportive environment meant that I was in a more regulated place. And when I was going into incidents, I knew exactly where I was at. So I had that emotional intelligence as to, right, I'm a little bit stressed at the minute. How can I bring this down? Or vice versa, I'm going a little bit in too much shutdown. Like, how can I re energize myself? And why that's so powerful is because if we don't have any awareness of our nervous system and any training, we'll be running into these high pressure situations and we'll be going really high into like an activated state. And when we're at those like really high levels of stress, the blood moves out of our the executive function of our brain, and we actually just go into survival mode states where we're not thinking clearly. So for me to have that emotional intelligence around my nervous system and the safety from my environment means that I was able to go into things at a lower level of stress. Like, yes, I could still go in and take action very quickly, but I could also bring it back, and I wasn't getting stuck in these high levels of stress where then actions start to become more fraught and responsive, sorry, reactive, as opposed to like choosing your response.
Right,
Is
right.
that kind of what you were
Yeah,
talking into?
absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. And that emotional intelligence, that's actually something that the mentor that I called upon, she was trying to teach me, because she was basically my boss for most of my career, in EMS. Whether she was a captain first and then became a chief and then moved on to become a chief at another department, but she's still a mentor of mine. I still call on her every few times a year just to touch base and share things with her and whatnot. But one of the things she started talking to me about early on, because I think she saw the potential of my ability to lead and whatnot, and she started to teach me about emotional intelligence as a man. as, that we don't we don't have much emotional intelligence. And that's not a slap in the face. It's just if you don't know what emotional intelligence is, and I was one who did not have a clue what that meant. When I dove into what it meant, I went into it humbly. I went into it with maybe I can learn something from this. Maybe I can be a better person. Maybe I can better husband. Maybe I can be a better dad. Maybe I can be a better employee. Maybe I can be a better coworker. So I went into it with that attitude, wanting to better myself to learn about emotional intelligence. So we always talk about the nuggets that you take away from my episodes, and there's two nuggets that have been dropped on this one. So one, I was actually going to after you explain the last one, I was going to tell about the first nugget, but right now because of emotional intelligence, you dropped that nugget on us. If you don't know what emotional intelligence is, or you don't have a grasp on it, do yourself a favor, find a book, find a program, find a trusted source that you can understand what it is. Be open-minded. It is a bit of a gut punch sometimes when you start to learn about emotional intelligence, and you have to be humble when you learn about it. If you're not humble when you learn about it, you're gonna get that attitude of, oh, I'm bigger and better than anything else. I don't need this. So emotional intelligence is very important, because once we understand, as Abby mentioned, once we understand emotional intelligence, we can go into the other factors that can help us stay there and make better choices. So the other one is kind of a piggyback on that, and then we'll get back to the last thing you mentioned about being able to how you were able to regulate, and that's kind of shares into what you're doing now. But the first nugget she dropped was she said something very, very profound: permission to be human. When you give yourself permission to be human, you can change a lot of things. If you accept the fact that you're human and that you are not the end all be all of everything in this world, you can actually allow that emotional intelligence to be accepted and brought into your life. You can allow the ups and downs. You can allow the stigma to just float away. Bye bye, stigma. When you realize that you are allowed to be human, we all, as first responders, we have calls where there is mental health crisis, and we do not judge. We go in with the thought process of helping that individual. How is that any different than if we're in a mental health situation? Because we're accepting them to be human, but we don't accept us to be human. So permission to be human, take that as a biggest nugget of this episode, is give yourself permission to be human. Do you agree, Abby?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And just to kind of add on the back as well, I think when we go into frontline work, I think we pick up on our environments, and I think because we don't always have that like underlying foundation of emotional intelligence, what we often think resilience is about is actually disconnecting from our emotions, and we think that that's actually
Mm.
what strength is. But when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's actually about going into those emotions so that actually they don't frighten us. So
Yeah,
instead of disconnecting,
yeah,
we're reconnecting, and actually we're not scared of our emotions, and then we have this full spectrum of life like available to us.
right. That's a third nugget, in my opinion. With you saying that right there, that is absolutely another nugget I want people to take away from this. So I'm going to do something at the end of all of when I start building all of my episodes out. I'm gonna get my program captures all the transcripts automatically, right? And I'm gonna probably put that stuff into ChatGPT and say, everywhere where I say nugget, make me a list of the nuggets that were talked about, and I'm gonna put out an ebook for us to be just to grab away those nuggets, because that's actually a third nugget that you dropped on us that I think is very, very important. So with all that being said, let's switch gears again. We've switched gears a few times here. Let's switch gears and just let's go ahead and talk about, you're no longer in the police force. You've started a new business. We'll talk a little bit about that. You're going to come on my Ignition Path podcast too, and we're going to talk specifically about the business, where we'll do a lot more talking about her business growth and sprinkle in the first responder stuff. Where this episode we're doing mostly the first responder mental health stuff, and then we want everybody to know about Abby's business and what it does, because ultimately, what is your business based on? Your business is based on service. What you do is just like me with my business. I am still serving my fellow man, fellow woman. You are still serving in this new business. You're just serving in a different way. So our servitude had not gone anywhere. We just changed gears. So talk to us about what you do now, and how that came about, and we'll wrap things up and go from there.
Great. So my business came about actually around the period when I hit the burnout stage and was dealing with all the emotions at the same time and having to figure out a different approach to looking after my mind, my body, and my health and well-being from what I was doing, which was mindset, keep pushing forwards, focus on goals, go to the gym, be really disciplined, eat really clean, meditate longer. It was that kind of approach. And I think after, having such poor health and getting back on the path of like, right, let's look after myself, I actually thought I was doing a meditation class and found myself in a breathwork class. And that's really when my new journey started, because what breathwork can be really powerful for is helping us to release stress, trauma, tension, emotions, energy that's been stuck in the body.
Mhm.
And so I had this big emotional release, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And I was so curious as to why that happened. Can you release trauma from the body without having to sit in a room and talk about it?
Right.
And then I looked it up and I was like, it's a thing.
It's a
It's
thing.
actually real.
It
And
is.
then I was like fascinated, obsessed, started doing my own research on like the word of somatics. So the word somatic just means of the body.
Mhm.
Um, and that led to me getting into the nervous system regulation work. And
Mm.
from there, that really helped me to actually finally heal from trauma and to be able to understand my emotions, to process them, and then meet my own needs. So I was actually at the best I had ever been just from these few tools. And I love them so much, I decided I'm going to go and do my own qualifications in these things and start a coaching business. And I was still in the police at that time, but I suppose it was just quite challenging because not a lot of police officers set up a business in the police that support other police officers. So the police force were a little like, we don't know what to kind of do with this, like we're not too keen on it, and I want to do things internally, and everyone has different agendas and maybe not so open to change, just to something completely new. And I suppose there was a crossroads moment where I just thought, I'm going to follow my heart and I'm going to leave the police and set up this business full time. So that's when Healing Blue Hearts was born. And after I left the police, and I was running mainly as a coaching business, specializing in somatics, nervous system regulation work. And then I had just taken a breathwork qualification, a somatic breathwork qualification, which is also going to be an additional for those on the front line who really need it. And just a little bit of a background on what somatic breathwork is. And I always say to people taking a session for the first time, as we've said, that somatic means of the body. We live in this world where we are just living from the neck upwards in our heads. And what happens is that our minds become disconnected from the body.
Mhm.
So the practice, we use the breath to connect the mind back to the body so that I can work in harmony together again. Because if they're not working in harmony, they're working in two separate parts. And in doing so, it allows us to go into the body, release that stress, trauma, energy, emotions that are stuck, and release them. And that gives us, a lot of benefits, but three main benefits is that yes, it's anxiety, stress relief, but it also helps to rebalance our energy levels, because I think not a lot of people realize that holding on to stress, trauma, and all those the emotions that we don't want to express or we are suppressing, it actually drains our energy levels. And it's like pressing a big reset button on our body, and it helps us to think more clearly. So it's a really, really deeply powerful practice, and it helps to naturally regulate our nervous system because the breath controls the nervous system. So super powerful practice, and for me, I really want to start delivering that on the front line.
Right. Well, and I'm so glad that you explained it that way because, being from the medical background and being a respiratory therapist for the first part of my career and still one right now, is I know that breathing is important to regulate many things. That's how, we can see through the breath when it comes to different things that we can put on a patient, whether it be a pulse ox or a capnography. We can see how a breath can affect what's going on internally. So breathing makes so much sense to control the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. There's all kinds of stuff out there that is this is not voodoo stuff, people. This is not voodoo. This is this is literally stuff that has been tested and written about to regulate when it comes to breathing exercises, to regulate your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your that deep that deep central nervous system stuff is all through the breath, and you can direct it. And there's all kinds of stuff out there. So one thing that we talk about on the Elevate podcast, and what I bring to people, and I've had a breathwork and hypnosis guest on before too, and we talked about this, and it's on another episode too. If you want to hear more about breathwork in general, Abbie's information, of course, will be in the show notes. You can contact her directly, see other things that she's done speaking specifically on it. But it's that sympathetic and parasympathetic, actual science to our bodies that we can actually do something about. We can consciously say, I need to take a big deep breath. I need to box breathe. I need to do a 4 or 5, or the different types of breathing exercises, which Abbie can teach you all that stuff. I don't know them offhand. I just know how to do them because I've been trained as well on it. Now, do I do it often enough? No, I should do it more often, and that's just something where we have to get into. But when it comes to what Elevate Podcast brings you, one thing that stuck out, what you just said, was when sitting in a room and talking, and that's what everybody thinks that mental health is. Mental health regulation, mental health resilience, mental health understanding, normalizing mental health isn't sitting in a room talking with people. It is not. It can be 100%. If that's what makes you feel good, it can be. But the Elevate podcast brings you alternate things that can introduce you to a new space that actually has an effect on your mental health if you just explore it and accept it and move into a new environment and away from the fact that talk therapy is the only answer, because it's not. It should be sprinkled in. You should have some guide. So you should have a professional person that can guide you through these things. But there's so many options out there now. In other episodes, I explore many different options that are new wave, many different that go back to the core of us with breathing techniques, different therapies about like rapid eye movement and whatnot. There's all kinds of things sprinkled in with our podcast that tells all the different places that you can do procedures, medical procedures you can have done, and not a lobotomy, but but things that you can do. So I explore you to look at other episodes of all the different things that I bring to the podcast that shows alternate ways to help us deal with our mental health on the first responder realm. So Abbie, tell us a little bit how to get a hold of you. Of course, everything will be in the show notes, but go ahead and say it verbally in case someone's fast on the fingers and they've got their phone, which, that's where most people watch and hear episodes on. So.
So I mainly hang out on Instagram, and my handle is at Healing Blue Hearts, which is a nod to the blue light professionals.
That's right. I'm actually going to it right now if my computer will work. I don't know if I've actually... at Healing Blue Hearts. Let's see if I can find you. There you are. Abbie Westgate. All right, you're added. So at Healing Blue Hearts, there are some dashes in there. So but I just typed in Healing Blue Hearts and it found her. So yeah, everybody go ahead and look her up on Instagram. Anything else that she has for contacting her will be in the show notes, so look below. And once again, thanks everybody for coming in. I appreciate you being here and sharing your time with us. And Abbie, thank you so much for sharing all your information with the audience of the Elevate podcast. We appreciate it. Anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
No, just to say thank you, Kyle. I've really enjoyed just sharing and talk about my experiences. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Take care.
That's a wrap for this episode of Elevate, brought to you by Frontline Empowerment Solutions, your partner in building resilience and fostering continued growth. If you found something valuable today, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could use it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next conversation. We're here to bring you more stories and insights, all aimed at strengthening the first responder community. Together, let's keep elevating each other, one episode at a time.